They tell us New Orleans sinks because it's built on Mississippi River sediment, soft ground, poor planning, the price of building a city below sea level. But what if the city isn't sinking at all? What if it's floating, suspended on top of something they buried in 1788, something they never wanted us to find? In March 1788, a fire consumed over 850 buildings in the French Quarter. The official story says it started in a private chapel, spread by Good Friday winds, and destroyed most of the colonial city. Convenient timing, convenient destruction, and incredibly convenient that almost immediately afterward, Spanish authorities mandated that all new construction must be built on foundations at least 3 feet higher than the previous structures. 3 feet. That's not flood prevention, that's burial protocol. Today we're examining architectural evidence, geological anomalies, and suppressed historical records that suggest the 1788 fire wasn't a disaster, it was demolition. A coordinated operation to bury an advanced civilization's infrastructure beneath a new city, and the reason New Orleans has been slowly revealing its secrets ever since. The first clue appeared during routine foundation work in 2003. A construction crew breaking ground for a hotel expansion on Decatur Street hit something at 12 feet down. Not bedrock, not clay, but precisely cut limestone blocks arranged in a grid pattern. Each block measured exactly 3 feet by 3 feet, with joints so tight a razor blade wouldn't fit between them. The construction company's geological survey, later quietly removed from public archives, noted the blocks showed no evidence of hand tooling and possessed thermal properties inconsistent with any known 19th century masonry technique. The blocks weren't holding anything up. They were covering something. The crew continued excavating laterally, following the grid for 40 feet in every direction before hitting the property line. The pattern continued beyond their dig site with perfect geometric precision. But here's where it gets strange. The spaces between the grid blocks weren't empty. They were filled with a concrete-like substance that contained fragments of what looked like melted glass, metallic fibers, and something the initial analysis described as vitrified organic matter, plant material that had been subjected to temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The construction was halted for 3 days. City engineers arrived, took samples, and ordered the site filled, and construction resumed with a different foundation plan. The geological survey vanished from city records within a week. The 3 workers who spoke to a local history blogger about the discovery were transferred to different job sites within the month. And the hotel that eventually opened there, it has a basement that officially doesn't exist, sealed behind a wall that wasn't in the original blueprints. This wasn't the first discovery, and it wouldn't be the last. In 1965, during the construction of the Superdome, excavation crews working 60 feet below surface level encountered what they initially thought was a buried street. Cobblestones in a perfect herringbone pattern stretching in 4 directions. But the stones weren't cobblestones. They were hexagonal basalt tiles, each one precisely 6 inches across, fitted together so perfectly that the entire surface formed a single continuous plane. The tiles showed no weathering, no erosion, and no variation in height across an area the size of 2 football fields. The construction supervisor's report, obtained through a FOIA request in 1998, included a detail that was never made public. Beneath the tiles, at a depth of 62 feet, ground-penetrating radar detected a hollow space. The cavity measured approximately 400 feet in diameter and 20 feet in vertical clearance. The report noted structural ribs within the cavity arranged in a radial pattern and regular geometric shapes along the walls that may indicate carved chambers or storage areas. When the supervisor requested permission to investigate the cavity, he was denied by someone whose name was redacted from the released documents. 3 days later, the entire area was filled with quick-setting concrete. The hexagonal tiles were covered, and construction proceeded on altered plans that avoided the site entirely. The Superdome sits on pile foundations that go around the cavity, not through it. And if you look at the building's structural engineering diagrams, there's a void in the foundation layout, a perfect circle where supports should be, but aren't. They built around it because they couldn't destroy it. Now, before you click away, thinking this is just isolated anomalies, let me show you something that connects these discoveries to that 1788 fire in a way that fundamentally changes what we think we know about New Orleans history. And if you're finding this investigation valuable, consider subscribing. We're documenting architectural evidence the official narrative can't explain, and you won't want to miss what we uncover next. The pattern of discoveries follows the exact boundaries of the 1788 fire with unsettling precision. Every single major foundation foundation anomaly documented in New Orleans falls within the 850 building burn zone. The limestone grid on Decatur Street, inside the fire boundary, the hexagonal basalt platform under the Superdome, inside the fire boundary, the vitrified foundations discovered during the 1969 International Trade Mart construction, inside the fire boundary, the metallic substructure encountered during the 2010 streetcar line expansion on Canal Street, inside the fire boundary. Outside that zone, nothing. Standard clay, standard sediment, standard wooden pilings that you'd expect from 18th and 19th century construction. The architectural discontinuity follows the fire's perimeter like it was drawn with a ruler. But here's where the evidence cascade begins to establish something impossible. If these structures were built by French colonists in the 1700s, we'd see construction techniques consistent with that era. We don't. Instead, we see thermal processing capabilities that wouldn't exist until the mid-20th century, material sciences we still can't replicate, and architectural precision that modern laser-guided equipment struggles to match. The vitrified organic matter found beneath the limestone grids has been independently analyzed 3 times, once by Tulane University in 2004, once by a private geological firm in 2011, and once by LSU in 2019. All 3 analyses reached the same conclusion. The organic material was subjected to temperatures between 2,800 and 3,400 degrees Fahrenheit in an oxygen-rich environment for a sustained period of at least 6 hours. That's not a fire. That's industrial thermal processing using technology and energy sources that officially didn't exist in 1788, or 1888, or 1988. One of the Tulane researchers, Dr. Patricia Herrera, included a note in her analysis that was struck from the published version, but remains in the university's archives. The thermal signature is inconsistent with any natural fire event. The uniformity of vitrification across multiple samples suggests a controlled process with precise temperature regulation. Comparable thermal signatures are only found in modern glass manufacturing facilities or nuclear test sites. They deleted that paragraph from the public version, but they didn't delete the data. The metallic fibers discovered in the concrete-like fill material present an even deeper problem. They're not iron, not steel, not any alloy we have cataloged. Spectrographic analysis shows a copper-titanium-silicon composition that doesn't appear in any metallurgical database. The fibers are hollow, microscopically perfect tubes, approximately 0.3 millimeters in diameter, arranged in a woven matrix that demonstrates tensile strength exceeding modern carbon fiber by a factor of 12. We can't make this material today. We don't have the technology to create hollow metallic fibers with these properties, let alone weave them into a composite matrix and integrate them into a thermal-resistant concrete. But there it is, sitting in storage containers at LSU's Materials Science Lab, extracted from foundations that official history says were laid by French colonists using 18th century techniques. The pattern repeats with unsettling precision. In 1982, the city began a major infrastructure project to upgrade water mains beneath the French Quarter. The work required excavating utility trenches 8 to 12 feet deep across 32 city blocks. Of those 32 blocks, 29 contained what the workers called the gray layer, a horizontal stratum of concrete-like material approximately 18 inches thick, positioned 6 to 8 feet below current street level. The gray layer wasn't on any city plan. It wasn't in any historical record. It predated all known construction in the area, and it was absolutely uniform. The same thickness, the same composition, the same depth across 29 city blocks. When crews attempted to break through it with jackhammers, the material fractured into geometric shapes, perfect hexagons, pentagons, and triangles with angles precise to within 0.1 degrees. The project engineer, Thomas Delacroix, wrote in his daily logs, "The material resembles modern Portland cement but contains no Portland cement. Compression tests indicate a strength rating of 12,000 psi, which exceeds modern highway-grade concrete by 40%. Material shows no degradation despite being subjected to Mississippi River flooding for an estimated 200-plus years. No explanation for source, composition, or installation method." The city's response was to classify the engineering logs as sensitive infrastructure documents and forbid workers from discussing the gray layer publicly. The water main project was completed by routing pipes around the layer rather than through it, adding 18 months to the timeline and $3 million to the budget. And when researchers later tried to access the engineering logs through public records requests, they were told the documents had been lost during Hurricane Katrina. Convenient. Except Delacroix's logs were digitized in 1997, 8 years before Katrina. The digital backups were stored on 3 separate servers in 3 separate states. All 3 backups were deleted in 2006 during what IT records describe as routine system maintenance. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Every major infrastructure project in the 1788 burn zone for the past 40 years has encountered the same pattern. Advanced materials at depth, geometric precision beyond period capabilities, thermal signatures indicating extreme heat processing, and systematic suppression of investigation. And we haven't even discussed what lies beneath the gray layer. If you're starting to question the official narrative of New Orleans history, you're not alone. Thousands of researchers are connecting these dots and discovering that architectural evidence tells a very different story than textbooks admit. Subscribe to follow this investigation, because what we're about to examine in Act 2 reveals not just what was buried, but why they needed an entire city fire to bury it. The suppression isn't accidental, it's systematic. In 1994, Dr. Raymond Boudreau, a geophysicist at the University of New Orleans, received a grant to conduct a comprehensive ground-penetrating radar survey of the French Quarter. The official purpose was to map underground utilities and identify potential sinkhole risks. But Boudreau had read Delacroix's leaked engineering logs and understood what he might actually find. His survey covered 42 city blocks. The radar penetrated to depths of 80 feet, and what it revealed fundamentally contradicts everything we're told about when and how New Orleans was built. Beneath the 1788 burn zone, at depths ranging from 30 to 70 feet, the radar detected a network of geometric structures forming a grid pattern that extends across the entire surveyed area. The structures include rectangular chambers measuring 20 to 40 feet on each side, corridors connecting the chambers in straight lines and precise right angles, and what Boudreau's analysis described as architectural features consistent with archways, columns, and possibly stairwells. The structures show no signs of collapse, no indication of flood damage, and no evidence of natural geological formation. They're artificial, precisely engineered, and completely absent from any historical record of the city's construction. Boudreau presented his preliminary findings at a regional geophysics conference in April 1995. 2 weeks later, his grant funding was terminated due to budgetary restructuring. His radar data was confiscated by the university under a claim that it contained sensitive information about critical infrastructure vulnerabilities. And when he attempted to publish his findings independently, he was informed that his 10-year review would be negatively impacted by engagement in non-peer-reviewed sensationalist research. He never published. He never spoke publicly about the survey again, and when researchers later tried to replicate his work, they were denied permits by the city on the grounds that ground-penetrating radar might interfere with municipal fiber optic networks, a restriction that appeared in city code in 1996, 1 year after Boudreau's survey, and applies only to the French Quarter. But here's where it gets strange. Boudreau's confiscated data wasn't destroyed. It was transferred to a private consulting firm called Heritage Infrastructure Solutions, a company with no website, no listed clients, and a business address that turns out to be a law office in McLean, Virginia. The firm received $3 million in payments from an entity called the Historic Preservation Advisory Board between 1995 and 1998, except there is no Historic Preservation Advisory Board in any federal or state registry. The money came from somewhere, it went to someone, and the only product was the disappearance of evidence showing that structures exist beneath New Orleans that shouldn't be there. The pattern of suppression extends beyond individual researchers. In 2008, the Louisiana Geological Survey proposed a comprehensive study of subsurface conditions beneath New Orleans to improve flood modeling after Hurricane Katrina. The study would have included core samples at depths up to 100 feet across the entire metropolitan area. The proposal was approved, funded with $7 million in FEMA disaster preparedness grants, and scheduled to begin in January 2009. 3 weeks before the scheduled start date, the project was canceled. Not postponed, canceled. The official explanation cited conflicting priorities and resource reallocation. But the FEMA funding had already been transferred. The equipment had been purchased, the drilling permits had been issued, everything was ready to proceed. What happened in those 3 weeks? A review of City Council meeting minutes from December 2008 reveals a closed-door session attended by city officials, representatives from the Army Corps of Engineers, and 2 individuals identified only as federal consultants. No transcript exists. No official record of discussion topics was filed. But immediately following that meeting, the mayor's office issued an executive order reclassifying the proposed core sample sites as areas of archaeological sensitivity requiring federal oversight before excavation. The archaeological sensitivity classification triggered a regulatory review process requiring approval from the National Park Service, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and the State Historic Preservation Office. The review was estimated to take 18 months. It has now been 16 years. The review is still pending. The core samples have never been taken. And if you search for records about that December 2008 closed-door session, you'll find that the meeting minutes were inadvertently destroyed during a routine document purge in 2012. The same year, a FOIA request was filed asking for those exact minutes. The silence is deafening. But while official channels have been systematically sealed, private discoveries continue to leak through. Because the truth about what's beneath New Orleans isn't just buried in the ground, it's buried in plain sight, in architectural features that don't match the official timeline, in construction techniques that predate their supposed invention, and in a city layout that makes no sense, unless you understand it was designed around something that was already there. Let's talk about the streets. The French Quarter's street grid is supposedly based on a 1721 plan by French engineer Pierre Leblanc de la Tour. The plan shows a simple rectangular grid with streets running parallel and perpendicular to the Mississippi River, standard colonial city planning. Except when you overlay the 1721 plan onto the actual street layout, they don't match. The streets deviate from the plan by angles ranging from 2, 3 to 7, 8 degrees. That might sound insignificant, but at urban scale, those deviations create misalignments that compound across the city. Buildings that should be rectangular are trapezoidal. Intersections that should be 90-degree angles are 83 or 97 degrees. Block sizes vary by as much as 40 feet, even though the plan specifies uniform dimensions. City planners have attributed this to surveying errors and practical adjustments during construction. But surveying errors don't create systematic patterns. They create random variations. What we see in the French Quarter isn't random. It's organized around specific points that create geometric alignments the original plan doesn't account for. In 2013, architect and urban planner Dr. Michel Thibodeau conducted a computational analysis of the French Quarter's street layout using modern GIS technology. She discovered that if you ignore the 1721 plan and instead map the actual street angles and deviation points, they form radial alignments centered on 7 specific locations within the burn zone. These 7 points create a perfect heptagon, a 7-sided polygon with internal angles of approximately 128, 57 degrees, precise to within 0, 3 degrees. The heptagon's center point falls exactly at the intersection of Chartres and St. Louis streets, directly above the site where the 2003 construction crew discovered the limestone grid. Thibodeau's analysis was published in an academic journal, peer-reviewed, and largely ignored by mainstream urban planning discourse. But here's what makes it impossible to dismiss. The heptagon's geometry matches architectural patterns found in pre-modern structures across the world. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the Borobudur Temple in Indonesia, and the subterranean chambers beneath the Giza Plateau in Egypt. All of these sites feature heptagonal geometry. All of them predate recorded history at their locations. All of them demonstrate construction capabilities that official chronologies can't explain. And all of them have been connected to theories about an advanced pre-flood civilization, what some researchers call Tartaria, what others call the Old World infrastructure, and what official archaeology refuses to acknowledge exists. The pattern repeats, again and again and again, because the street layout isn't the only architectural feature that predates its supposed construction date. The buildings themselves contain evidence that they weren't built from scratch in the late 1700s. They were built on top of, around, and incorporating elements from structures that already existed. If you're beginning to suspect that the 1788 fire was cover for something much larger than a simple urban disaster, stay with me. We're about to examine the buildings that survived the fire and what their architecture reveals about the city that existed before 1788. And if this investigation is changing how you understand New Orleans history, consider subscribing. We're connecting architectural evidence, suppressed research, and pattern analysis that official narratives can't accommodate, and you won't want to miss where this leads. The buildings tell a different story. There are approximately 127 structures in the French Quarter that official records claim were built between 1789 and 1810. after the fire during the Spanish Reconstruction period, but architectural analysis of these buildings reveals features that don't match Spanish colonial construction techniques and predate the technologies that were supposedly used to build them. Take the Pontalba buildings on Jackson Square, constructed officially between 1849 and 1851 by Baroness Michaela Pontalba. These are iconic structures, four-story brick buildings with elaborate cast-iron balconies, considered masterpieces of American architecture. But there's a problem with the foundation. During renovation work in 1987, structural engineers discovered that the Pontalba buildings sit on a continuous brick foundation that extends 6 feet below the basement level. The foundation bricks are larger than the building bricks, 9 inches by 4 inches by 3 inches compared to the standard 8 by 4 by 2 inch bricks used in the walls. More importantly, the foundation bricks show thermal signatures indicating they were fired at temperatures exceeding 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit. That temperature is significant because conventional brick kilns in the 1840s operated at 1,800 to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The higher temperature creates a denser, harder brick with superior water resistance and compression strength, but it requires technology and fuel sources that weren't available in mid-19th century New Orleans. The foundation bricks also contain trace elements of volcanic ash and silica additives that don't appear in any documented brick production from that era. The engineer's report noted that the foundation appears to predate the superstructure by a significant margin and recommended further investigation. The recommendation was denied. The foundation was sealed, and renovation continued with strict instructions not to disturb the existing structural elements. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Similar foundation anomalies appear in nearly every major structure in the French Quarter that's been subjected to deep structural analysis. The old Ursuline convent, supposedly built in 1752, sits on foundations containing Roman-style opus caementicium, a concrete mixture that uses volcanic ash, which wasn't available in Louisiana and wasn't used in Western construction after the fall of Rome until its rediscovery in the 1750s. How would a French colonial convent built in 1752 use a construction technique that was just being rediscovered in Europe at the exact same moment? The Cabildo, built officially in 1795 as the seat of Spanish colonial government, contains interior support columns made from a single piece of stone, no joints, no sections, carved from solid granite blocks weighing an estimated 12 tons each. The nearest granite quarries are in Texas and Arkansas, hundreds of miles away. There's no documented record of how blocks that size were transported to New Orleans in the 1790s, and engineering analysis shows the columns were installed before the walls were built around them, suggesting they were already in place when construction began. The pattern extends to the residential structures as well. Throughout the French Quarter, what are officially classified as Creole cottages, built in the early 1800s, contain architectural features that don't match the construction methods of that period. Ceiling beams hewn from single cypress logs measuring 16 inches square and 30 feet long, trees that would have been 300 plus years old when cut, making them already ancient when the city was supposedly founded. Door frames constructed using mortise and tenon joinery with wooden pegs instead of metal fasteners, a technique that fell out of use in European construction by the 1600s. Window glass with chemical composition indicating Central European manufacture from the early 1700s, installed in buildings that supposedly didn't exist until the 1800s. Every single one of these features suggests that the buildings weren't constructed from raw materials in the late 1700s. They were reconstructed using materials and elements that were salvaged, repurposed, or built around elements that couldn't be removed. They didn't build a new city in 1788. They buried the old one and built over it. And the 1788 fire wasn't a disaster, it was demolition. A controlled event that gave them the excuse to mandate raised foundations, bury the subterranean infrastructure, and erase physical evidence of whatever civilization built the original city. But why? What were they burying? And who ordered it? The answer might lie in what happened immediately before the fire, and in the geological event that nobody talks about. In December 1787, 4 months before the Great Fire, New Orleans experienced what historical records describe as unusual seismic activity. Several accounts mention trembling earth and sounds like distant thunder from below ground. The earthquake, if that's what it was, wasn't strong enough to damage buildings, but it was widespread enough that records from Baton Rouge and Mobile also mention it. What's strange is that New Orleans sits on the Mississippi River alluvial plain, hundreds of miles from any known fault line. Earthquakes in this region are geologically improbable. The new Madrid seismic zone, which did produce major earthquakes in 1811-1812, is 300 miles north. There's no tectonic explanation for seismic activity in New Orleans in 1787, unless it wasn't tectonic. Several historical accounts of the December 1787 event mention details that don't fit a normal earthquake. Witnesses reported lights in the sky, unusual colors in the river water, and mechanical sounds accompanying the tremors. One account from a French merchant describes a great hissing as if from steam engines beneath the streets, followed by collapse of cellars in several buildings along the riverfront. Collapsed cellars, breaching of underground spaces, exposure of subterranean infrastructure that wasn't supposed to be there. 3 months later, the city burns. The official story of the 1788 fire says it started at the residence of Don Vicente José Núñez on Chartres Street during a Good Friday service, spread rapidly due to strong winds, and consumed most of the French Quarter before being brought under control 6 hours later. But if you examine the actual historical accounts, not the sanitized summaries, but the original letters and reports from witnesses, the fire's pattern doesn't match an accidental spread. The fire didn't radiate outward from a single point. Multiple witnesses reported seeing fires start simultaneously in different locations across the city. A Spanish official wrote that flames appeared to emerge from beneath structures in many quarters at once, as though the fire had been set from below. Another account mentions explosions preceding the flames in several buildings, throwing debris into the streets. That's not wind-spread fire. That's systematic ignition from multiple points. And here's the critical detail. The fire didn't spread to the areas outside what became the mandated reconstruction zone. Buildings immediately adjacent to the burn zone survived untouched, while structures blocks away from the supposed origin point burned completely. The fire's perimeter matches the boundaries of the modern French Quarter with precision that can't be accidental. They burned what needed to be buried.